bowling ball going back and forth in a line from you to me.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're back. It's been, I think, about 3 or 4 months since I've seen this gentleman, this British gentleman. His name is Marcus Allen. Marcus, you need no introduction, but I do want to just mention I really enjoyed the latest copy of Nexus magazine. It was a fascinating read.
Well,
especially the issue celebrating the 20. I think Dukin picked the 20 best that he considered the most interesting articles in the last, what was it, decade or 20 years? Maybe you can elaborate more than that. It was fascinating if you can elaborate more. That was absolutely a good read.
that's good. Yeah, no, it was basically to celebrate the 200th edition of Nexus magazine. Now, Nexus is a bi-monthly, comes out every 2 months.
Yeah.
And it started back in the autumn of 1986. So we're talking quite a long time ago. And I mean, how many other magazines do you know of this nature, alternative magazines, have maintained publication for that period of time and maintained the level of articles? And we keep getting calls from people who are saying, you know, it saved my life. Some of the information in it is really good. Some of the health information, because we do health articles, we do future science, we do future science, we do alternative health, hidden history, who built the pyramids? Anybody answer that? Well, we get a gold star because we don't know. And looking into the sort of what's going on in the world that we're not being told about necessarily all the time.
Exactly.
This is the latest Nexus. It's on its way to you. It's got articles here about the impact of electricity on living organisms. Well, that's useful.
That is, considering, you know, today.
A subject which many people probably don't know very much about.
Yeah.
Is the Richat structure. How many people can say where it is even, let alone what it is? The Richat structure is a geological formation. It's a real thing. Geological, just basically to look at the current issue, and one of the articles in it is the Richat structure, R-A-C-H-A-T. Not many people have heard of it. Not many people can even say where it is, but it's actually in Mauritania, in West Africa. And from a photograph, an aerial photograph, even from a photograph from space, it looks like the description of Atlantis, 3 concentric circles. I'm not saying it is Atlantis because nobody knows. But there's a lot of interest now because people are able to examine it from all different sort of angles and look at it in relation to the description given in Plato, where he was talking about it. And very, very few people have even actually been to the Richat structure. It's so isolated in the Western Sahara.
Yeah.
That there's no reason to go. Well, there is a reason to go now. Anyway, that's current issue of Nexus, which will be
I look forward to it.
It'll be out in North America in February. No, hang on, which one is it? It's February, March in the UK, so it'll be March, April in North America. But you're going to get yours beforehand. We also talk Bigfoot encounters on record. That's David Childress putting a very interesting summary of Bigfoot encounters and the usual stuff in Nexus. If you haven't read Nexus, treat yourself.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I'm really looking forward to that article too on Bigfoot, because there seems to be the author David Paulides. I think you're familiar with him.
Yeah.
He's talked about, for those of you out there not familiar with David Paulides, he has a series of books called 411 Missing Persons, and strange activity going on in North American national parks, with parks all over the world actually. And he's a former detective, and he's drawn a correlation between Bigfoot sightings and UFOs at the same time. Right. So there seems to be, when there's a Bigfoot sighting, there seems to be a simultaneous sighting of UFOs. So he thinks there might be a correlation. So that's really interesting. I love reading as much as I can get on that. So I look forward to that article in Nexus magazine.
Yeah. Bigfoot encounters, because Bigfoot is the best known of the, shall we say, hairy ape type, bipedal, standing upright. That's in North America, in Canada, and in the Western America. That's where most of the sightings occur. There are other places as well, but around the world there are plenty of other similar events. In the Altai, there was even accounts of interbreeding between humans, and the Altai is central Russia, interbreeding between what they called, I forget the name of it, but there was interbreeding between them and humans, and there were offspring. So there was something there. Now, most people have heard of the abominable snowman, the Yeti of the Himalayas. That's another example. And that goes into China as well, where you get people in China who've seen a similar thing. In Australia, you've got the Yowie. That's the Australian equivalent. So there are creatures which look like hairy humans or apes, orangutans, but proportions similar to humans. Maybe they were the Neanderthals that we heard about. Because if humans and these creatures can interbreed, that means they're very, very closely related. Humans can't interbreed with chimpanzees. There won't be any offspring. In the same way that horses can produce an offspring when interbred with a donkey, but it's going to be infertile. So there are many mysteries that are being investigated now for the first time, and Nexus is normally the place where you'll see it mentioned for the first time. So treat yourself to a copy. Get out to Barnes & Noble, any decent bookstop, or go to nexusmagazine.com and you can subscribe there. Good luck. Your life will change.
Well, as I like to say, and I say it with conviction, Nexus Magazine, I've had subscriptions to other magazines, but I don't have any of those subscriptions anymore. I maintain my subscription to Nexus for the simple reason. One thing that Nexus stands out, and this isn't, folks, this isn't an advertisement on Nexus, so just please don't read me wrong. The one thing for me that stands out with Nexus Magazine is number one, the variety of subjects that they focus on. Where other magazines tend to limit the topics that they will focus on. Nexus has quite latitude when it comes to topics. And the other thing is all these articles, when they get into science, medical industry science, so on and so forth, or any science of any discipline, it's always properly sourced.
Yeah.
And that's what I really like about it. So if you're not sure about what Nexus is putting forward, then you can always check the sources that Nexus provides.
Good point. Yeah. Well made. And I can confirm you were not paid for that.
Yes, I haven't received any checks, no rubber checks, no real checks, nothing. So I'm a big fan of Nexus. I have been for quite a few years now. And I highly recommend it. And it's available in North America. You can actually get it in a Chapters bookstore here in where I am. I'm in the Ontario region, the GTA region. You can get it there. You can get it anywhere. I've been down to New York. I picked it up there too. So you can either subscribe or pick it up at any Barnes & Noble or Chapters up here. So anyway, Marcus, there's some interesting developments, shall we say, since the last time you and I have talked. I want to give a little bit of background to this subject we're going to talk about. For those of you out there, I know some of the regular viewers on my channel and Robert's channel, and of course Neil Peel's channel, will know who I'm talking about. But for those of you who don't, there's an Apollo moon mission proponent. Now, I don't know whether he's a shill or not. I have my suspicions, but we'll call him a proponent for now, and we're being very kind. His name is Steve Mumbling, and he's a chap from Australia. And actually, a little background, more background on this. He did a hit piece on me a couple of years ago. He was supposed to appear on Neil Peel's channel, where Marcus regularly is a regular guest, to debate all things Apollo. And he had backed out the last minute. And I said to him, I had messaged him and basically said that, you know, it's unfortunate you backed out. We're looking forward to it. He tried. So he said, well, come on my channel. And I said, no. I said, I don't know who you are. And I'm not coming on your channel unless we have some kind of moderator, so on and so forth. So anyway, he did a hit piece on me. You can check it out on his YouTube channel. I'm very proud of the hit piece he did on me, actually. It's Randy Walsh chickens out of a debate. Yes, you'll like it. I'm sure some of the people, regulars on here, have seen that video. So anyway, long story short, he agreed to another appearance on Neil Peel's channel, on the Apollo Detectives, again with Marcus in attendance. And this time he did follow through on his commitment to appear in the channel. And on the channel was Neil Peel, Ben, Scott Henderson, Ben, his last name escapes me, and you can fill that in a sec, Marcus, Scott Henderson, and of course, the one and only Marcus Allen here. And I'm going to let Marcus describe what happened. But it was not an interview or a debate. It was a mudslinging match. I mean, I have no other way to describe it on the part of Steve Mumbling. It was the most, how shall I say, rather interesting, maybe disturbing discussion on this subject I have ever seen to date. And from here now, I'm going to let Marcus fill in all the details and let you know what happened. I will provide a link to the raw version of the Apollo Detectives, which Steve Mumbling has in his channel, because he always thought we were going to edit stuff out. And then I'll link the Neil Peel version of it, where he actually him and Ben discuss what had happened here with that interview. So Marcus, please take the floor here, Marcus. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Okay, well, thanks very much. I appreciate that. It's always good to have people who are challenging one. And I've been challenged for the last 30 odd years, ever since I started discussing this. This is quite a recent, the Steve Mumbling event, if you want to call it that, started when I appeared on it's Ben Emlyn Jones. He was the moderator on the chat, because Ben lives in Oxford, and he runs the HAPANWU, Hospital Porters Against New World Order. That's what it stands for. He runs a television YouTube channel and interview channel, and he's been going for many, many years, probably 10, 15 years, and he's got an incredible collection of interviews. So he was a very good person to have as a, shall we say, a moderator. Somebody who would introduce everybody. I mean, somebody has to do it. So Ben is very good at it, and he works with Neil Peel, or Neil Geddes Ward. He works under two names. And he basically introduced us, and Ben had organized a conference in Oxford, where he lives, called the Dreaming Sources Conference, which is a play on the phrase dreaming spires, which is what Oxford is known as. So Dreaming Sources, that occurred about 4 or 5 years ago, and I was one of the speakers there, and as usual was talking about the Apollo moon landings and how they never happened. And it was recorded and posted on Ben's channel and on Neil's channel, and it was a routine type of talk that I do. So people probably heard most of the main points in it, to do with vacuum, to do with pressure, radiation, heat, all the problems we have. Steve Mumbling took exception to this and decided to call me out. Well, that's fair enough. I don't mind being called out. And he posted on his channel his preferred method of recording his own contributions is to have his presumably mobile phone mounted in his car, and he drives around the Australian outback, well, Australian forest. He actually lives in Western Australia near Perth. So there's plenty of scope for driving around, and the scenery doesn't change very much, because Australia is a big place, full of trees, full of outback, full of not very much interest. Anyway, he drives around and he gives his thoughts on the subject. Now, Steve is an engineer. He's probably 50s, 60s, something like that. So he's been around the block a few times. He drives quite good cars, big engine cars. He obviously knows his cars. Anyway, he decided to call me out and decided that he would say that I was lying because during the talk that I was doing, I referred to humans landing on the moon, astronauts landing on the moon, which is purely my way of describing what's going on. There's no point in saying allegedly every time you talk about people landing on the moon. So I said at the beginning of the talk that I would not be doing allegedly landed on the moon during the talk, but I would say that I don't consider that it has happened. I don't consider that humans have been any nearer to the moon than low Earth orbit. And there are various quite substantial pieces of evidence to support that. Anyway, Steve decided to call me out on this. Well, you said that they landed on the moon. How can you say they didn't? You're a two-faced, snake-tongued idiot who doesn't know what he's talking about. That's the sort of normal response. So I get this response. I didn't respond to it, but Ben Emlyn Jones did, and he took it apart because Ben obviously knew what I was talking about. He'd been at the conference, the Dreaming Saucers conference, so he knows where I'm coming from as regards the Apollo mission. And this went on. I mean, Ben has got much more patience than I have, and he was prepared to sit down and discuss it for an hour or so. Those films are up on his site, so nothing is hidden about this. Anyway, Steve was fairly persistent, and he basically had a go at everybody around has the temerity to say that Apollo didn't happen. So we invited him to discuss it with us on Neil's channel, Neil Geddes Ward, his Apollo Detectives segment of his, because Neil does other broadcasts as well.
Yeah.
The Apollo scenario is just one that he does. So Steve Mumbling was invited on. Now, what I didn't know at the time, I might explain a little bit about his reticence to appear, was that he'd never ever used Skype. And when we eventually did the interview, he actually said, this is the first time I've ever used Skype. How do you get the chat up? How do you record anything? So obviously he wasn't familiar with the technology behind Skype. And rather than admit that and say, can you help? Can you give me a hand? How do I record it? How do I share screen? How do I open the chat? So it was down to all of us to try to educate him as we went along as to how to use Skype. And he eventually got the hang of it in the end, I suppose, because he was still there 2 hours later. And as is I mean, I've experienced a few of these people who challenge me or challenge anybody who says that Apollo wasn't real. And they have a particular way of going about their business, which is they will attack anybody who has the temerity to even hint at the fact that Apollo might be a fake and fiction. So they will attack the individual doing it, usually using personal insults. Oh, you're such an idiot, you don't understand what you're talking about. You can't even answer this question properly. One has trouble working out what the question actually was. And then when you can't sort of come to any conclusion or any agreement with them as to where they stand and where somebody like me or Ben or Neil or yourself or Scott, where they stand, they're not prepared to even discuss it. So basically, that sort of discussion really goes nowhere. I mean, I'm quite prepared to do it, and I've done it with, I think it's 3 or 4 people now. Blue Earth Thing being one of them, who is a chap who lives in, I think it's Alabama or somewhere like that, Central America anyway.
Actually, yeah, I remember that. I was on that particular chat with Blue Earth Thing, and I've noticed now that just the diversion for a bit, I noticed I haven't been able to find his channel.
No.
So I'm not sure where he's gone to, but he seems to have dropped off somewhere. I don't know where he is, but anyway, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, last I heard, he was building an observatory in his back garden. So
good for him.
maybe he's just occupied by doing that. I don't know.
Well, one thing I'll say about Blue Earth thing is, much and all as we disagreed, and it was still a much better and more constructive discussion than what you had with Steve Mumbling.
Yeah.
Blue Earth thing wasn't insulting. He didn't use any language. He was civilized. I give him credit for that.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
It was actually quite a productive talk because he was
Yes.
willing to go along with some of the things. I explained a few things where I was coming from. He explained
Yes.
where he was coming from. So we knew roughly how far we could push each other.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is fine. That's the way it should be.
Yeah, and again, to be fair, he was he did bring up some good questions, and it was, as you said, as we both agree, it was very constructive. And so and that's what I was hoping would happen with Steve Mumbling, but quite the opposite happening. And just before you continue, I encourage everybody to watch, number one, the raw video, which you'll find on Steve Mumbling's channel, and to watch the version that Neil Peel put out. Watch both of them. There's nothing to hide here. It's everything Marcus has been describing so far. Go ahead, Marcus.
Yeah. No, it was, obviously, Steve was concerned that we would record what was being said and then edit it to our advantage. This is a reasonable assumption to make. So we guaranteed that he would receive the raw footage of the recording, which is what happens on Skype anyway. So I started the recording right at the beginning. And as soon as you record something on Skype, every person taking part receives a copy of that recording automatically.
Yeah.
It's basically the way Skype works. So there was no way that we were going to be able to hide anything. Not that we would want to hide anything, because we've got nothing to hide. Regrettably, it appears that Steve Mumbling might have had something to hide, because he immediately started, he was talking to Scott originally, and he asked him a question which I couldn't answer about, it's to do with the transmission space path loss, something like that.
Yeah, he was talking about, I'm just generalizing now. He was talking to Scott about communications during the Apollo era from the moon. Yeah. And Scott had used, to describe what he was talking about, Scott had used the inverse square law. And so, Steve asked, I thought was a very reasonable question. And I thought, okay, this looks like it's probably going to be a good debate. And it wasn't too long after that, as Scott was explaining himself and explaining how he had arrived at his conclusion, where Steve Mumbling kept interrupting him, and at one point, Steve called him a cretin, and it just never. It was over at that point, as far as I'm concerned. The whole thing was over at that point. That's how it continued for the next 2 hours. Was name calling. I remember at one point he said that he's smarter, he's more intelligent than all of you put together. I mean, this is the kind of, it was almost a little bit like the Buzz Aldrin and Bart Sabrile syndrome, if I could put it that way. I mean, why the violence? I mean, this is something that I've noticed. There's a lot of violence and a lot of threats and a lot of abuse that comes our way, and which is why I block people, and is why others block people too. Because if you want to come on my channel or anyone else's channel for that matter, then you're perfectly within your rights to disagree with me. I have people on my channel right now that disagree with me and they want to argue. As long as they keep it civilized, they're welcome to be on there.
Yeah, exactly.
But one thing, Marcus, before you continue, for all the Apollo proponents out there, I want to direct your attention to this fact. All of you complain about me, about Marcus, about Neil Peel or Ben Evelyn Jones censoring your comments, or censoring or potentially censoring anybody who comes on to debate us about the Apollo missions. But you don't seem to have a problem with all the other platforms censoring people like us. And we've always been civilized. You don't have a problem with Google or YouTube censoring people. You don't have a problem with Facebook. You don't have a problem with Twitter censoring people, which has now come out. But you seem to have a problem when you accuse us of doing it. You seem to have a problem with that. So I ask you to drop your hypocrisy and look at the reality.
Yeah.
my little rant there for today there, folks. Anyway, go ahead, Marcus. Sorry, Marcus.
Nice rant. Nice rant. That's the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah.
I say, I had we got the Steve Mumbling episode. That's probably part 4 of the Trying to Take Us Down episodes. Blue Earth thing was probably one of the first. That was 3 or 4 years ago. Those talks are still up on Robert Williams' channel, also called rather confusingly Apollo Detectives. So if you go onto YouTube, put in Apollo Detectives into the search bar on YouTube, not on Google, on YouTube, you'll find it. There's about 500 films that Robert Williams has posted about our discussions. I mean, they involve all of us discussing it, and he illustrates them very, very well because they can follow it much more clearly. There are other people on there as well. Raza Vihari in China. Robert's just posted a discussion I had with Bart Sabrell, looking at some of the more recent developments in the deathbed confession of Gene Akers. Anyway, to go back to the discussions that we've had in terms of people opposing us, opposing our view, trying to support NASA's view. There was Blue Earth thing, and then there was the famous, rather short discussion with Peter Bassett. Now, Peter Bassett is based in the UK, and he runs a mobile planetarium to describe to school children what the sky at night is like and what occurs there. And one of the things he's quite well known for, or used to be, is that he would consider anybody who questioned Apollo to be beyond the pale, to be not even worth discussing anything with. Anyway, we persuaded him to come on to, it was a radio interview, which was done about 3 years ago. He came on, I was discussing Apollo generally, and he was going to come on for the second hour of the show. 2018 we did this, and he was going to show how wrong I was. Anyway, we started off, and I had a few questions for him, and he said, I can't answer that because I haven't been given advance notice of the question so I can research it. Okay, fair enough. Somebody wants advance notice of a question, they'll be able to research it. Anyway, at the end of it, it's about an hour we went on. There were various things we said. And eventually, he decided to report us to the regulatory body in the UK, which is called Ofcom, Office of Communication.
You're kidding.
No.
Oh.
He was going to make a formal complaint because he didn't have advance notice of the questions, so he couldn't answer them correctly. And this was unfair interview technique, and that we should be censored, and we should be admonished by the official regulatory body in the UK for conducting an interview in this way. And we were all absolutely jaw-dropped, flabbergasted. What is he talking about?
Yes.
Nobody has ever given me advance notice of the questions they were going to ask me.
Well, remember, Marcus, when you and I and Bart Sabrell appeared on the HBO interview?
Yeah.
And they had, they flew a camera team up here to do the interview with me, and the same with Bart Sabrell, and they interviewed you online. And never once did either of us get an advanced copy of the questions they were going to ask. That's standard procedure. You do not have a right as the interviewee to demand what they're going to ask. You don't have that right.
No, of course
it's standard procedure. They have a right to ask you any question they want at any time on a live recording.
Yeah, they were all live.
Or a recording.
Yeah, I was interviewed in London. They'd set up the studio in London.
Yeah.
To record it. They had. I don't know who the film crew were, presumably contracted by HBO to record us on the Vice series. And I just had to appear at the studios at a given time, sat down in front of the camera, lights on, and I was asked the question. Presumably they were questions dictated by the production team in New York.
Yes.
And I thought, well, that's the way these things work. Now, I've appeared on Coast to Coast a few times. I've appeared on many shows. In fact, I'm due to appear on Night Dreams Talk Radio on Friday night. at 10:15. At 10:15 Eastern. I always get mixed up with Eastern and Pacific and Central times.
Yeah. So
Anyway,
I know I'm a pilot.
yeah, it's about 3 o'clock in the morning in the UK. So, there's dedication or stupidity for you. But I'm prepared to do it. And they haven't sent me the questions. Good heavens. I wouldn't expect it, because then I can't give spontaneous answers. If I know what the question is going to be, it'll sound very, very stilted, rather prepared. I don't expect to get. So when you get somebody complaining that they were not given advance notice so they could research the question, this is somebody who's supposed to know about it. I'm talking about Peter Bassett here.
Yeah.
Somebody who's supposed to know about it. And I thought, this is just so ridiculous that somebody could demand that sort of leeway or latitude in a live radio interview. It was a radio interview. It wasn't even a television interview. It was a live radio interview. Anyway, Neil Peel, who was the producer of the show at the time, said, no, internet discussions are not regulated in the same way, which he should have known that, but obviously didn't. So because he was being rather shown up for not knowing what he was talking about, he decided to complain. And he's persisted in fact, about a year ago, I got in touch with him again and suggested that we might like to have a debate in his local astronomy group down in Kent. And I said, I'll come along. You can ask me any question you like. Could be an interesting discussion as to what's going on. He said, no, we don't ask people who are not informed about their subject. And I thought, hang on a minute, where's he going with this? Basically, he didn't want to appear with me to be shown up for being incompetent in terms of knowledge of Apollo.
Yeah.
So that's the way it goes. And then we have the Steve Mumbling episode, where, as you said, he was fairly abusive to all of us.
All of you throughout the whole 2 hours.
But then, in fact, that was the first and only time I've ever nearly lost my cool.
I saw that.
About an hour in.
Yeah, I saw that.
He was talking over Scott all the time, which is not the way you talk. If you know anything about Skype, you know that as soon as the other person starts talking, you shut up, because if two people are talking at the same time, you can't hear either of them. So it's basically just standard etiquette. That's the way these things work. So I basically lost my cool and said, look, just shut up and listen to what is being said. It's not rocket science, this.
No.
Because by trying to drown us out, by trying to obstruct what we were saying, he was giving away his position, which was that he didn't actually know very much about where we're coming from. He only knew where we were not coming from, which is where he was coming from, which was that Apollo is real, NASA never lies, we all know what we're talking about, you don't know what you're talking about, therefore listen to us because we know what we're talking about, because NASA wouldn't lie. That's the approach he took.
Or Google it. Every time, I lost count the number of times during that interview process with all four of you, when he kept saying his fallback position was Google it, Google it, Google it. One thing that Steve Mumbling that I noticed too, there's an awful lot of negativity coming from him. He just seems to push this negativity out. Like you could almost feel it coming off the screen. I mean, I thought at first it was a little bit funny, but then it just got a bit much. I know some people that I know were getting very stressed listening to him. And I don't know if that's one of his strategies, but there was a lot of negativity that came out of that raw interview. You cannot sit through that whole 2 hours. You have to take a break. That's how negative he was. And it's a lot of negative energy that he personifies, that he puts out.
Yeah.
And he ended up, if just to, I'll let you talk in a second here, but I interrupt, Marcus. I know I do sometimes. Forgive me, but you do bring up the best in me, and I just you get me talking. But he does tend to. One thing I noticed with him is that when he's not sure about something, he'll jump on you. He'll talk over you. When you were talking about the film and vacuum, he actually said, "Oh yeah, that's your strong point." But then when you tried to explain it, he jumped on you, and it was very interesting. He brought up a very good point specific to you. When he said, "Well, NASA were using a specialized film." And my immediate question to him would have been, well, because I was thinking about this, where's that film?
Good point. Yeah.
Why is it that every time you proponents out there, for example, Blue Earth Thing or Steve Mumbling or anyone else, every time you bring up something, we find out that it just doesn't exist. It's been destroyed along with all the numerous other so-called evidence that NASA supposedly had that backed up its claim that they went to the moon. And that was the latest one we brought up. Oh, it's a special, they used a special film. Where is it? Did you document it? Do you have documentation of that? Where is that film? Yes, Steve Mumbling, I'm calling you out. Where is that special film that NASA used successfully in the vacuum of space?
Exactly.